The desert air was dry and heavy as the A-10 sat on the tarmac, its engines humming low like a predator waiting to strike. The pilot sat inside her visor, down, her heartbeat steady, but her mind racing. She had heard the SEALs' voices in the briefing room hours earlier, when they warned her, do not even think about it. The valley was too narrow, the flak too thick, the enemy weapons too sharp. They said no one had ever taken an A-10 through that path and survived, but she listened in silence, her face giving nothing away, her eyes cold and unblinking behind the glass of her helmet. And though the others did not see it, there was fire in her chest, a fire that no words could quench. She had been underestimated before. She had lived her whole career in the shadow of doubts, from generals, from fellow pilots, from the men who thought the skies belonged only to them. She had carved her path in silence, never asking for permission, and never waiting for praise. The A-10 was her beast, and she knew its strengths and weaknesses better than anyone. She had trained in mountain ranges where the winds screamed like banshees. She had flown through storms that swallowed radar signals and lightning that blinded even the strongest eyes. So when the SEALs said don't think about it, she did think about it, and she thought about it hard until the thought became a plan. Her mission was clear: extract the stranded team before enemy reinforcements closed in. Intelligence reported heavy armor on the ridges and shoulder-fired missiles waiting like wolves in the rocks. The valley was a death trap carved by nature and filled by man, with enough fire to bring down anything that dared cross it. But she saw not only danger, she saw an opening, a thread of sky barely wide enough for wings, and a line of fire that only an A-10 pilot who knew her machine like blood could trace. She knew if she could enter low enough, hugging the dirt and stone like a shadow, she could unleash the cannon at point-blank range and give the SEALs the window they needed. As she tightened her gloves on the stick and pushed the throttle forward, the ground crew turned away as if not wanting to witness what they believed would be the end. She felt the beast roar, alive, engines shaking, the air turbines spinning, the wings heavy with steel and fuel. She knew that once airborne there would be no return path, no second chance, only the valley and the fire within it. And as the A-10 lifted off into the blazing sun, the question was no longer if she would make it through, but how far she would go before the sky itself tried to tear her apart. The A-10 climbed steady into the open sky, its engines tearing the silence into shreds. The pilot kept her jaw locked and her breath slow as the horizon spread wide before her, but her eyes were fixed only on the black scar of the valley ahead. Every warning echoed in her mind. The SEAL commander had said, "You will not come back if you try this," yet those words felt less like warning and more like a challenge. She remembered the smirks across the table, the men who doubted her resolve, and now high above the desert she felt the doubts become fuel for the fire in her chest. The radio crackled, voices of the stranded SEAL team heavy with tension. They were pinned down deep in the valley, their supplies running dry, their ammo barely enough to hold off the waves of fighters pressing closer. She listened carefully to their calls, every tone, every pause mapping their desperation into her own plan. She could sense their fear, but beneath it she sensed trust. They knew she was coming. They did not know how she would make it through, but they trusted she would find a way, and that trust wrapped around her like armor stronger than any steel. The valley mouth drew closer, cliffs jagged like the teeth of some ancient beast waiting to devour the reckless. The radar screen blinked alive with hostile signals, locks and pings swarming across her display like hornets. Her fingers flexed on the trigger, ready to call the gun into song. She lowered altitude inch by inch, watching the cliffs rise higher until the sky above her seemed to narrow into a tunnel. The A-10 was not built for grace, but she made it dance through the air, each movement smooth, each angle precise. The beast obeyed because she demanded nothing less. The first missile streaked past her wing, a white trail of smoke slicing the air. She rolled sharp, the canyon walls grazing her vision, stone rushing by like a blur. The sound of the GU cannon thundered as she squeezed the trigger. The rounds ripped into the ridgeline, turning rock and enemy positions into dust. She could hear faint cheers from the SEALs beneath, drowned out by the roar of the engines and the storm of fire she unleashed, but she knew this was only the beginning, for deeper in the valley the enemy waited with weapons heavier and smarter than the first wave, and she would have to push lower than she had ever dared before. The valley narrowed into a twisting throat of stone, the cliffs pressing closer as if the earth itself wanted to crush the intruder. The pilot gripped the stick hard, her gloves damp with sweat, though her voice remained calm, steady as steel. Her eyes flicked across the instruments, but her instincts guided her more than the blinking screens. She felt every vibration of the beast beneath her. The A-10 was alive with tension, its wings cutting dangerously close to the jagged edges the enemy had chosen this place for a reason, and she knew she was flying straight into the heart of their trap. Gunfire erupted from the cliff's tracer rounds, slashing the air in glowing arcs. She dipped lower, hugging the canyon floor, so close the dust rose in clouds behind her tail. She fired short, controlled bursts from the GU cannon, the sound like rolling thunder tearing enemy nests apart, rock exploding into fragments, the echoes shaking the canyon like an earthquake. The SEALs, pinned deeper inside the valley, listened to the distant rumble and knew she Was close. The storm was coming for them, and with it, their only chance to survive. Her radio barked another warning. Hostile armor spotted moving toward the team. Tanks grinding forward on narrow paths dug into the cliffs. She pictured the SEALs surrounded. Ammunition low, hearts heavy with exhaustion, their eyes on the sky praying for salvation. She clenched her teeth and dropped lower, still the ground a blur beneath her wings. The alarms inside the cockpit screamed missile locks from both sides. She ignored the shrill cries of the machine, focusing only on the rhythm of the fight, her mind racing faster than the threats that closed around her. She banked sharp into a turn so violent the wings nearly scraped the stone. Her vision darkened at the edges, but she held steady, pulling the beast through angles no one dared attempt. The missile streaked past, smashing into the canyon wall, a fiery bloom lighting the shadows. She dived into the smoke, using it as cover, and burst through with the GU roaring, spitting fire at the tanks below. One exploded in a chain of sparks, metal and flame consuming the narrow path. The others screeched to a halt, blocked by wreckage. Her move bought seconds, only seconds, yet in this place seconds meant survival. The radio filled with static, then a strained voice from the SEALs. She could barely hear them over the roar, but the words cut through. We are moving, hold them off just a little longer. And she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The canyon twisted again, narrowing into a corridor so thin it seemed carved by the hands of giants. The walls rose higher, blotting out the sun, until the valley floor lay in shadow. The pilot felt the weight of the darkness pressing against her canopy, her pulse quick but steady. She knew the enemy was waiting deeper inside, weapons hidden among rocks, camouflaged against the jagged cliffs. The radar screamed warnings, but she had no room to maneuver, no space to climb. The only path forward was to go lower and faster and trust the beast would obey. The SEAL's voice cracked through the static again. They were under heavy fire, pinned at a choke point, with enemy fighters closing from both directions. She could picture their rifles burning through the last of their magazines, the grit in their eyes refusing to surrender, but even grit could not stop bullets forever. Her jaw locked as she dipped the nose of the A-10, skimming so close to the ground that dust spiraled in her wake. Her finger pressed the trigger. The cannon thundered like a storm from hell. The rounds tore into bunkers hidden in the cliff's rock, and steel shattered in cascades of smoke, clearing a path for her men to breathe. But as the echoes faded, she caught sight of the real danger, a line of missile launchers embedded deep in a cut of stone, their barrels aimed directly into the corridor. She was trapped, and the alarms shrieked louder than ever, her brain flashing with options, too few, too costly. She had seconds to decide. If she climbed, she would be exposed. If she slowed, she would be an easy mark. The only choice was the reckless one, the choice no manual ever taught: dive lower, below the line of fire, and use the canyon itself as her shield. The beast screamed as she forced it down her chest, pressed into the harness, the canyon walls rushing past inches from her wings. One missile streaked overhead, exploding into shards that rained down on her fuselage. Alarms blared, damage reports flashed across her display, but still the engines roared. The cannon sang again, tearing the launchers apart one by one. Fire filled the canyon, light and smoke chasing her path. She had cut through the trap with nothing but nerve and fury. Her radio crackled again, the SEAL leader voice steadier now. They were moving fast toward extraction, but the enemy was throwing everything to cut them off. She had given them a path, but the question pressed against her mind: could she hold it long enough before the walls of the canyon became her coffin? The valley stretched deeper, twisting into a labyrinth of stone and shadow. The pilot felt her body ache from the violent maneuvers, yet her grip never loosened on the stick. The beast still obeyed, though alarms blinked angry red across her cockpit panels. Damage warnings shouted for her attention, but she silenced them with focus. The mission was not survival, the mission was the men below, and she would not turn back, not while they still drew breath. Her ears caught the crackle of the SEALs' voices over the radio, heavy breathing beneath their words, boots pounding against dirt and stone. They were moving fast now, weaving through enemy fire, trying to reach the designated extraction point, but the enemy had anticipated their path, waves of fighters swarming down ridges like vultures. She could hear bursts of gunfire in the background, the sound of desperation pressed into every syllable. She clenched her teeth. The time for hesitation was gone. She banked hard right. The beast shuddered under the strained wings, brushing the walls of the canyon. The roar of the GU cannon erupted again, the thunder rolling through the valley as rounds shredded enemy positions, dug into the cliffs. She felt the vibrations of every shot echo through her bones. Explosions tore open rock faces, scattering dust and bodies into the abyss. The SEALs cheered faintly through the static, but their voices were cut short by another warning: armored vehicles closing in from the east, blocking the path to extraction. The pilot pushed the throttle to the edge, engine screaming as she forced the A-10 through the narrowest bend, yet stone rushing past so close she could see cracks and scars etched by centuries of wind. One wrong move, and the canyon would swallow her whole, but she held steady, driving forward into the storm. She released a barrage of rockets that streaked ahead in fiery arcs, slamming into the armored convoy. The first vehicle erupted in a violent fireball. blocking the path the others scattered trying to retreat, but the cannon finished what the rockets began until nothing but burning wreckage remained. Smoke filled the canyon and her instruments flickered under the strain, but she pressed on the radio came alive again, the SEAL leader voice urgent, "We are at the extraction point, but the enemy is regrouping, air support will not arrive in time, you are all we have left." She drew a sharp breath, steadying her hands, and knew the final test waited just beyond the next turn where the enemy would have prepared their deadliest trap. The canyon widened suddenly into a basin ringed with jagged cliffs like the walls of an arena, and in that arena the enemy waited, weapons lined across the heights, barrels trained down on the floor where the SEALs had gathered. She could see them, small dark figures moving with precision, taking cover where they could, but the open ground left them exposed. She felt her chest tighten as she realized the trap was closing from every direction. The enemy had been patient, drawing her deeper until escape was nearly impossible. The alarms in her cockpit screamed again, missiles locked from multiple angles, radar lighting up like a storm of fireflies. She forced her breathing steady, every muscle tense, but controlled her eyes, scanning the chaos unfolding below. The SEALs had nowhere left to run, and if she failed here, their mission, their lives, and her own would all end in this bowl of stone and smoke. She pushed the throttle down, the beast roared, engines howling as she dove into the basin at a speed that left no room for hesitation. Gunfire erupted in every direction, tracers streaking like burning comets across her canopy. She rolled sharp, pressing her body against the harness, vision tunneling black at the edges, but she refused to blink. The GU cannon thundered, spitting fire into the cliffs, tearing apart nests of gunmen. The echoes shook the ground like a drum of war. Explosions rippled through the ridges, spraying stone and dust over the SEALs, who now pushed forward with renewed fury, their rifles snapping in bursts timed with her assault. She had given them a breath, but the storm was far from over. A missile streaked toward her right wing. She banked violently, the blast rocking the fuselage panels, rattling, alarms blaring, damage warnings flashing again, smoke trailing from the wingtip, but still the beast flew. The engines coughed, then roared again like a wounded predator, refusing to fall. She dipped lower, hugging the basin floor, and fired rockets into a cluster of armored vehicles. Their destruction lit the canyon in a wash of orange flame. The heat rippled against her canopy as debris rained down. Through the static, the SEAL leader voice cut sharp and fierce, "We are moving to the pickup zone, but they will not stop until one of us is gone." She grit her teeth, sweat dripping into her eyes, the truth pressed heavy against her chest. There would be no easy way out. The only path forward was to take the fight closer than any pilot had ever dared, and as she steadied the stick, she prepared to dive once more straight into the fire. The basin behind her now burned with smoke and shattered steel, yet the enemy was not broken. The pilot could feel it in the air, the weight of more fire waiting ahead. The SEALs were running hard across the open ground, every second counted, but the cliffs above them still swarmed with fighters moving into fresh positions. She forced the A-10 lower still until the belly almost scraped the ground, dust whipping into a storm behind her engines. She had become not just a pilot, but a blade cutting through the canyon, every motion exact, every breath steady, even as chaos thundered around her. Her instruments flashed critical damage warnings. The beast had taken hits in the last pass, the right wing trembling under stress, hydraulics bleeding out, but she ignored the cries of the machine. She spoke to it, silently urging it forward. She had pushed this aircraft beyond limits before, but never into the mouth of death like this, and still it answered because she commanded it to, because it was bound to her will. Her voice calm over the radio, she told the SEALs to hold their ground for 30 seconds more. She would clear their path, or she would not speak again. The cliffs erupted with fire, missiles streaking down in converging arcs designed to trap her in the kill box. Her vision sharpened, time slowing to a razor edge. She pulled hard, banking left, then rolling into a dive so low, her wingtips carved trails of dust, sparks flying as stone-kissed steel. The missiles screamed past, colliding into the walls behind her, explosions tearing rock into avalanches that crushed enemy gunners before they could fire again. The ground shook, but she held steady, riding the beast through smoke and falling debris like a phantom. She unleashed the GU cannon once more, the sound tearing the basin apart, the heavy rounds cutting through bunkers and vehicles like paper fireballs, blossoming in rapid succession, lighting the night sky. Even in daylight, the SEALs seized the moment, charging toward the far end of the canyon, rifles blazing, voices roaring through the static, but their victory was fragile. She could hear the desperation in their breaths. The extraction bird was minutes away. Minutes that might as well have been years. Under this storm, the pilot pulled the beast up for another pass, the engines groaning under strain, her hands locked firm, her heartbeat slow and sharp. She knew this was the edge. No pilot had ever gone this low for this long, through this much fire. She could feel the canyon itself closing around her, and with the next turn she understood the line between glory and death was now thinner than a breath. Amina's breath caught as Detective Harris slowly lifted the device, turning it gently in his hands, examining every wire and panel with meticulous care. He whispered, "Stand down," once more, almost like a command, and almost like a shield protecting her from the judgment of others around them. The senior officer's brow furrowed, uncertain whether to trust the instinct and knowledge of the detective or to follow the rigid rules of protocol. The tension hung thick in the air, a living thing pressing down on everyone present, passengers shifting uneasily, murmuring quietly among themselves, unaware of the delicate balance between authority and reason. Amina felt a tremor run through her body, her fingers brushing against her bag, her mind recalling the nights spent perfecting the prototype, the sparks, the sketches, the endless trial and error, the quiet encouragement of her brother, the laughter and frustration, all condensed into this single moment that could decide the outcome of everything. Harris's eyes met hers for a brief second, and a flicker of reassurance passed silently between them. She tried to focus on that flicker, the only tether keeping her grounded, as the others debated quietly, their voices low but tense. The subtle repetition of "stand down" echoed in her mind, a mantra of patience, trust, and understanding. The senior officer finally shifted slightly, his shoulders relaxing minutely. The decision seemed to hang in the air like a breath suspended, waiting for the release of reason to outweigh fear. Harris carefully demonstrated the harmless function of the device, showing the small mechanisms moving exactly as intended. Amina watched with bated breath, her stomach twisting with suspense and hope. The murmurs of the crowd faded into the background, leaving only the hum of machinery, the rustle of papers, and the quiet tension that coiled around the space like a living thing. She could feel the seconds stretching endlessly, each one a delicate thread holding the fragile calm together. One wrong gesture, one misstep could undo everything. She clenched her fists slightly, trying to steady herself. Harris whispered, "Stand down" again, his voice soft yet firm, a signal that the moment was under control for now. The other officers leaned closer, their eyes narrowing as they examined the device through the lens of caution and curiosity. Slowly the realization began to spread across their faces that the device was indeed harmless, that it was a prototype for a science competition created by a young woman whose months of effort and ingenuity were evident in every detail. Amina felt a flutter of relief mingle with lingering anxiety. The suspense hung like a thin veil over the terminal, waiting to be lifted only when everyone acknowledged the truth, leaving the reader tense and eager to see whether the calm would finally hold or whether a single misstep could reignite the storm surrounding her bag and the small invention that had become the center of it all. Amina's shoulders loosened slightly as the tension began to shift in the terminal, the officers around her still cautious but gradually accepting Harris's judgment. The small device, now fully understood to be harmless, rested gently on the table, yet the memory of fear and suspicion lingered like a shadow. She watched the senior officer finally nod, subtly signaling the others to step back, and the crowd of passengers slowly resumed their normal movements, their whispers fading into the background, but Amina could still feel their eyes on her, as if some part of the danger had followed her. Harris remained close, his gaze sharp and steady, a silent promise that nothing would go wrong at this moment. Her bag carefully gathered and restored, she felt the weight of relief pressing against her chest, mingled with a lingering trace of anxiety that would not fully release her yet. She took a shaky breath and tried to focus on the quiet reassurance of his presence, the murmurs of curiosity from nearby. Passengers continued in soft waves, some asking quietly what had happened, others staring with wide eyes. Amina's mind replayed the sequence of events over and over, the fear, humiliation, near collapse, and then the quiet intervention that had saved her from both. Harris whispering, "Stand down" at the right moments, guiding her and the officers toward reason, a small miracle of intuition against protocol. Her fingers brushed against her bag, feeling the sketches, the small notebook, and the tiny device, a tangible reminder of her months of effort. The lights of the terminal seemed softer now as the adrenaline that had gripped her slowly began to ebb. She glanced at Harris one last time, and saw the subtle nod of approval, the silent acknowledgement that she had survived the ordeal, and that her work had been respected even in the face of misunderstanding. The other officers began to move away, returning to their duties, their expressions thoughtful, some exchanging quiet words, still processing what had happened around them. The passengers slowly resumed their routines, leaving Amina with a lingering sense of scrutiny mixed with relief. The small device that had caused so much suspicion now lay harmless and safe in her bag, yet the memory of tension, the whispers, the fear of misjudgment remained a vivid shadow. She realized that moments of understanding and discretion could change outcomes dramatically, that one person who chose to see beyond appearances could alter the course of events entirely. Harris whispered, "Stand down" one final time softly under his breath, and Amina felt the quiet closure settle over her. She straightened her shoulders and stepped back from the table, the suspense that had gripped the terminal finally beginning to dissolve, yet leaving a subtle echo of vigilance and uncertainty in the air, a reminder that calm could be fragile, and that every decision carried weight, leaving the reader waiting to see how the aftermath of this delicate encounter would unfold for both Amina and the quiet guard. Amina moved away from the table, her bag secured against her side, the weight of relief mingling with a cautious wariness that refused to leave her entirely. She glanced around the terminal, the passengers returning to their routines, the hum of machinery, the distant announcements, the shuffle of feet, all blending into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and charged with the memory of what had just passed. Harris walked slightly behind her, his presence a silent shield. She could feel the authority and calm that had guided her through the ordeal lingering in the air like a protective veil. She remembered the countless nights spent with her brother, the sparks and failures, the sketches and calculations, the tiny device that had become both a symbol of her work and a catalyst for suspicion and fear, now resting harmlessly in her bag. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The senior officer had returned to his duties, his expression thoughtful but neutral, the other officers moving about as if nothing had happened yet. Amina could feel the invisible tension that had gripped the terminal slowly dissipating, but never fully gone. The whispers of the crowd faded, but the memory of eyes on her remained, a ghostly reminder of vulnerability and scrutiny. She walked past the small cluster of passengers who had lingered, curious about the incident. A few nodded, politely acknowledging the resolution of the moment, yet others stared silently, as if sensing the gravity of what had almost occurred. Harris finally spoke softly, a low whisper, "Stand down," and Amina felt the words echo in her mind, a reminder of the delicate balance between vigilance and understanding, between fear and reason. The device in her bag, a small invention, yet a testament to persistence and ingenuity, now carried with it the weight of survival and recognition. She thought of her brother, and the pride that he would feel knowing that her work had endured scrutiny and suspicion and emerged intact. The terminal seemed to breathe with her as she stepped toward the exit, the soft hum of engines, the rolling of suitcases, the quiet chatter of travelers, all blending into a rhythm that felt ordinary, yet beneath it lingered the memory of a moment when authority, discretion and intuition had intersected to prevent disaster. Amina smiled faintly, her pulse slowing, her steps steadying. She realized that moments of courage and understanding could ripple outward, changing outcomes profoundly and quietly. The suspense of fear had dissolved into relief, yet left a lasting impression that would guide her in the future. The terminal faded behind her, the sunlight streaming through large windows warming her face. She felt a quiet sense of closure and gratitude, knowing that despite the uncertainty, the intervention had preserved not only her device but her dignity, and the silent whisper of "stand down" lingered in her mind, a reminder that judgment tempered with compassion could alter lives, leaving the reader with a lingering sense of awe and relief and